It will address key challenges faced by women in skilling and provide best practice for gender inclusive training methodology. Panelists will share case studies on making skill training more accessible to women and economically empowering for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Diksha. And you must be wondering, there are two people here, but there are two people online who will be joining us. One from, I think, UK, Francesca, and in fact, three people online. And Halima will be joining from UAE. And we have Edna from, I think, Bangalore. So can we have the panelists online, please? Okay, so I'll just, because, I think we already went around 18 minutes over short, and I think Nominita is still giving me the side eye. So we would have to maybe rush this through, but I think the discussion would be very, very specific. And as Sridhar said, it is going to be an action oriented. And to Param is here, he's gone. We have two brands here. So maybe, after the discussions on the gender part, because I think everything is connected here, E, S, and G. So essentially, we'll be talking about the S part here. So you can actually ask some questions, and of course, we'll have our brands to actually share their insights. So may I invite also Rohini Suri from ICC. She's the advisor of ICC, and she is, I think, one of the veterans, if I may use the word. And she was one of the first few people who was responsible to get JC Penney in India. And she is a very good friend. Please come, Rohini. And we have Mr. Rohit Aneja. He is, from Grapevine Designs, and he is also the secretary of NIFTA. So those of you who do not know NIFTA, Rohit will explain what is NIFTA. I think it's NIF Alumni. Yeah. So have a seat, Rohit. Quickly, I'll do the introductions. You can see the panelists here. So on my upper left, we have Edna Titus. She represents Very Group, erstwhile Shop Direct. Of course, she'll be talking a little bit about her company later. And then on my lower left, we have Halima Ahmed. She is joined from UAE. She is also, a gender expert, and also, consulting for Ethical Trading Initiative. And on my right side, we have Francesca Cisetti. She's working for Sainsbury's. Thank you so much, Francesca. I think you're calling from UK as of now. And what time is it there?
Right now, it's about 5 minutes to 11 a.m.
Oh,
so it's
great.
It starts early in the day.
Thank you so much for your question. And now, I'll just do a little introduction about this panel. This is titled as Elevating Business Sustainability Through Gender Inclusive Skill Enhancement. Essentially, the S part, the ESG. And, before we start, there are three things we have been talking about, because it's about being practical. I think, in my 17 years of career, worked in brands. I went to the other side, worked in the developmental sector, most recently with Marks and Spencer. One of the things what I've realized is, that, there are three key elements when you are actually talking about gender equality. Equality, equity, if you may use the word. So one is, of course, the equality when you talk about awareness. Second is accountability, because, there are nuances about, I think, being in a gender unequal society. I think it's everywhere. So accountability comes from a perspective of the institutions who have to uphold it. And last but not the least, from a MSME or even from a maybe institution perspective, the responsiveness. So how does the senior people in an organization, how sensitive they are towards the responsiveness part of it? Because we have been talking about it. And the second part I want to talk about is how can we have the infrastructural approach? I think last 17, 18 years, the focus has always been training, which is fantastic. But the question is, you go back to your respective training sources, you then start looking for the workers. Where are the workers? So which means also, how do we ensure data validation that leads to sustainability? So I think that the time has come to actually ask those questions here. So I invite Halima from ETI. if she could actually quickly, so you have 4 minutes, Halima, to the point, as we talked about today. If you can introduce your organization's role in promoting ethical trade, and then according to your organization, what could constitute gender inclusive practices within the industry? Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ranjeev. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Halima Ahmed. I am the gender advisor at the Ethical Trading Initiative, as Ranjeev mentioned, and I'm calling you out of the UAE. So thank you very much for having me. Just a quick overview. I think you might have heard about the ETI from Alok previously, perhaps, so I won't go into too much detail. But we are a multi-stakeholder initiative comprising of companies, NGOs, and trade unions that work collaboratively to find solutions to human rights issues in global supply chains. Our work is underpinned by the base code, which is basically founded on core international labor standards, which we ask all our member companies to adhere to. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. And from a gender perspective, we advocate for our member companies to be able to understand human rights risks in their supply chains from a gender lens. So being able to look at these risks and try and understand what the differential impact might be on men and women and how that can be mitigated, prevented, and remedied for should the need arise. So really, gender is at the core of what we do. And for us, I think gender inclusive practices from our perspective really is about ensuring that the rights of women workers, because we know that they're the more vulnerable gender across most supply chains, from garments to agriculture. Most supply chains you look at, it is usually women who are more vulnerable to human rights risks, be it forced labor, be it, occupational health and safety risks, be it violence and harassment. And so it's very important that we understand these risks and we are able to protect the rights of women workers and make sure that they're working in decent conditions and that they realize their full potential. There's a lot of data out there that does show the positive business benefits that accrue when you have a more inclusive and equal workplace. So, there's a lot of data at the sort of executive level where you see that Forbes have shown that some companies who have more women on their boards tend to better perform. I think there is data out there at the sort of factory level where we see that, factories with more equal workplaces where both genders are able to thrive and be productive. You have more you have less absenteeism, you have less turnover, and that obviously has an impact on productivity. But I think it's more difficult than that. I think we say we need to have gender inclusive practices, but how do we actually do that in practice? And I think we can come to that later on. I think a key part of that is making sure that we understand where the power imbalances are, because it usually boils down to that. And we also need to have a much better sense of these structural barriers that create these inequalities that we see. So I'll talk a little bit more about that and with some concrete examples, hopefully. But just to sum up that for us at ETI, gender is very much at the heart of what we advocate for when it comes to protecting and respecting human rights across all supply chains that our member companies are operating in.
Thank you, Halima. I think you're very right. You stressed on mitigation and remediation and the whole issue of power imbalance. In fact, that is what the spirit of, I think, one of the programs that was undertaken by some of the organizations where they talked about, career progression. I think the first step is about awareness generation. But I think it's also very important that, we have enough skill sets for more women to be out there so that, there is no power imbalance. Also, I think there is a positive impact to the organization, and also there's a research actually that has contributed to that can contribute to the GDP of a country. If you have 50% of women workers, you have more. Okay, so next question is for Francesca. So if you could actually help introduce Sainsbury's commitment to sustainability and maybe quickly lay out some of the initiatives related to gender inclusive skill enhancement by the company.
Of course. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, evening, everyone. I'm really honored to be here as Sainsbury's Ethical Trade Manager. And so let me just take a few minutes to then share with you our commitment to sustainability and that gender inclusive lens. So Sainsbury's, as one of the world's largest retailers, we recognize that individuals working in our supply chains are the absolute backbone of our operations. and that therefore empowering them, especially the most vulnerable or the most disproportionately affected by risks such as modern slavery, such as women, is an integral part of our vision. So when you buy a product from one of our shelves, it's important to understand the journey that it took to get there, all the way to the end consumer, from the hands that planted and picked to those that actually packed, produced, and then delivered the products. Hence the supply chain and operations kind of elements. And so a key part of our commitment to sustainability is therefore addressing that gender inequality in our supply chain or across our value chain. We know that women and girls are disproportionately affected by modern slavery. About 71% of all victims are women. This shows that modern slavery is a gender problem. This is because of gender inequality, because of discrimination. And I think through our work, we're trying to ensure that we're trying to tackle some of those challenges at root cause level. Sainsbury's not only sources food and sells food, but also garments through our Argos and Habitat, the technology side as well, but Habitat as well. In the garment, therefore, the garment industry is a key sector for us as well as a retailer. We know that around 80% of garment workers are women, but yet the highest paid positions are held by men. We also know that agriculture is not so different, where women can contribute significantly to labor, but the ownership of the land remains towards men. Men get paid more. I also know that because I come from a rural part of Portugal and I've seen that growing up. Thankfully, I grew up with some really strong examples of female empowerment through my mom, for example. And so I try to carry that vision in my work as well. And so what Sainsbury's is doing is trying to, through our policies, and then implementing them. So a human rights policy and ethical sourcing policy, we try to set really clear requirements for our suppliers, really clear expectations to say that women, to set principles like equal pay for equal work, non-discrimination in access to employment, training, promotion, or termination of employment. But also on that skill setting is, if you are accessing employment, how can we provide you with training, growth, and career opportunities and progression, the same that we would to a male counterpart or co-worker. So what we try to then do is we have this commitment set in our policies, but then the challenge is how we implement them, especially not just using our leverage with our tier one partners, but going further down the value chain or upwards the value chain, which is where often we have less visibility, less impact, and less leverage. So we've been doing quite a lot of work in recent years in trying to build our transparency in those relationships, all the way to, for example, in our food supply chains, all the way to the farmers, and supporting female entrepreneurship initiatives at farm level, at grower level, but also then across the value chain at production, processing facilities for female managers, delivering impactful training on inclusivity. So there's a series of initiatives across the business, but it all stems from our core principles, which is where kind of that gender inclusivity essentially part of our DNA as a company.
I think you hit upon a very important subject here on the topic of gender pay gap. I think this is a global issue, and you can see that in the supply chain. You can also see it maybe in many companies, and I think it's important that how do we go forward to actually addressing that. The other issue we talked about is like forced labor, which is again a reality. I think there are a lot of initiative that's being taken up. I think someday, I think we are up there. So from there, from a brand, maybe come to a manufacturer. I think Rohit, what is your experience in supplying to retail brands? You supply to retail brands, and of course, it has been very, very interestingly highlighted, like Sainsbury has highlighted, and also in the previous discussions also. What steps can the manufacturers do on the S part? And then, how can we actually look at gender inclusive skill development in the manufacturing process?
Hi, my name is Rohit, and before I proceed to this, I'd like to be asked, NIFTA is an association of NIFTA alumni, and NIFTA, as you know, is a premier fashion institute which was set up in 1988 by Government of India by the Minister of Textiles. And we have across the world about 30,000, 35,000 alumni right now in various stages of various areas and various positions in the industry. So I'm representing some of them. most of them. And going to what he has asked, before that, Ranjiv had very clearly and cleverly put this panel, which looked like gender inclusive. But the reality is actually the previous panel, where the India's, the gender participation is quite low, I would say, and especially the female labor force participation, which has in fact gone down from almost 36-37% in 2005 to almost 24% in 2018, which is a big number, which is, and now it is, I believe it's still a downward trend. Considering the amount of resource which we have in the country, I think we are wasting a lot of energy in this area. So I try to represent with my color, at least symbolically, to the labor force and a appeal that I think we need to add more in terms of the labor force participation. I'm not talking about executive roles. I'm not talking about merchandising roles. I'm not talking about roles in management, especially in the apparel industry, which actually is the largest employer of female labor force in the country still. Apparel industry, I think, employs about 45 million last count, but it needs to grow. And I'm going back to one of our factories, when we set up one of our factories in Noida in NCR about 15 years back. I'm just going to give you a little story of how this labor force participation can actually help you, help an industry on actual ground terms to get more productive and get more well balanced in your approach to the manufacturing. We found that in around 15 years back, setting up a sportswear manufacturing facility in NCR, most of the labor force which we had available was men workers and mostly migrant workers, which anyone in the industry here would understand that the problem was that there was no continuity, there was no way to train them up to the way we wanted them to work on. The bottom line was that we thought the best way to overcome this challenge is to find and train women workers. So in Noida, this was something which had not been done before. I don't think even now there is factories which have this kind of percentage of women workers. We trained 1,500 women operators across various sewing, cutting, finishing, packing, various departments of manufacturing in India. And the results have been so encouraging, so different. Like she said, Halima said, the turnover, absenteeism, it had gone down by almost 60-70% compared to what the men workers, if we had employed them and what we would have experienced. Because primarily, the other thing was, the other bigger aspect was the training of the operators. You could, the men workers were set in their ways. You know, they knew that, okay, I want to make this coat, I know how to make it from A to Z. But the women workers whom we could train would go more in the practices of with the way we wanted a new manufacturing company to work, a lean manufacturing facility or a facilities which had people who could work in a methods which we wanted them to do the operations. So this was a big challenge, and I think it is very encouraging that we still have, we employ that workforce still in Noida, in NCR region still. And I don't think there is many factories who have on it. Yes, there have been improvements in merchandising, soft skills, the managerial operations. Women force has more representation there, but at operator level, south of India, you will always still find women operators, but north was something. So I wanted to share this story. This actually is a opportunity which we need to tap as an industry, which could give you a more stable workforce, where the training can overcome most of your other handicaps in terms of what seasonal labor force and other things.
In fact, it's a very interesting insight. In India, when most of us know that, if you look at the garment industry, there's a big north-south divide. And what Rohit is talking about is that in North India, we have very few factories who have actually gone ahead and employed women workers. And he has found them. I mean, I think one is, of course, Shai Exports, and of course, Grapevine is another one. So it's important that, how do we ensure that we are able to employ more and more women workers? I think the availability is an issue. I think we have to look at that perspective. And okay, so the next question is, of course, to Edna from Very Group. So Edna has been around for quite a while, I guess, worked for so many companies, third party, and now she's ably leading the sustainability and social business for Very Group here. So could you quickly talk about Very Group's sustainability efforts and little insights? Of course, I'll have a detailed question because I expect Edna to be very, very frank about certain things we discussed the last time. About the gender inclusive skill development within your organization and the supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjeev. Considering it's such an honor to be here today, and I'm really not going to waste any time on my introductions because I think the topic is so interesting. I might use every single second to talk about the important topic that we've touched upon here. And as we all know, I mean, we've got Francesca here from Sainsbury's, Halima here, and what a fantastic thing it is that it's more, the panelists more are like majority is women here. So amazing thing. As brands, we all source from different countries, and we at Very Group are also sourcing from 13 countries, and Bangladesh, China, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, all of these happen to be our very important sourcing regions. And most of our suppliers in India are from the southern part of India, Tirupur. And having said that, why I'm saying this is because obviously all these regions, if you talk about Bangladesh, you talk about India, especially South India, so we've got majority of workers in the factories as women workers. And when we talk about gender, we do talk about, women empowerment and, enabling women. But I do feel that, it is not just about women, it's about men as well. When we talk about the gender, and both needs to be considered because, as much as a woman is considered as the central figure for the continuity of the species, while she's working in the factory and she's also taking care of the families, we often forget the fact that just providing her with a clean toilet and a nice, safe working place is not enough. A woman is not just a worker, she's also a mother, she has children, she has a family to go back and look after. What we often forget is about the holistic development of these workers. And, when she goes back home, it's also about her family, that, how well you support, because she is not just a factory's worker or a brand or part of a brand supply chain only while she is in the factory. She is someone as important to us outside of the factory. So at Very Group, we strongly believe in community engagement and, developing the overall well-being of these women workers. So, and because they are the bread earners, they take the salaries, they get home, and then, often it happens, it's very unfortunate to say this thing, but, the men would be managing their finances. And, we all say that it's so much of a thing in this century that women needs to be financially independent. Women needs to be financially independent. But here we're talking about women who are financially capable because they're earning, but are they actually independent? Are they actually financially independent? Do they really know how to manage their expenses? What is in terms of responsible recruitment are we looking at? So, when we're talking about women empowerment, are we also considering men and ensuring that they also understand that how women needs to be treated at the workplace and back at home? And when I say about, gender, it's like I completely agree with what Halima also mentioned, that females are the most vulnerable group. But having said that, it is also the migrant workers. And I understand Rohit also touched upon the migrant workers. What we really also need to understand is that, men traveling from northern states of India, going and working in Tirupur, face a lot, in terms of cultural differences, in terms of discrimination based on caste. And, often we had read in so many reports that, so many of them at some point of time had committed suicides. There was a massive ruckus in Tirupur some time back because of how the migrant workers were treated. So I think for us at Very Group, we look at it as a complete picture, and our objective is to ensure that we develop these women's overall well-being within the factory, outside of the factories, and also providing them with a platform. So as community engagement, we have been running some programs in southern India where we work with the families and we work with the parents, because there are a lot of women who migrate, or very young women in their in the age of 15 to 18 going and working in the spinning mills. So much for them to learn and so much of exposure for them. So giving them pre-departure trainings. But
Right.
all of this just not includes women, it includes men also. So that's how we are on this journey to enable the gender, to be gender skill development in our organization as part of our supply chain. So that's how we are following this practice.
Thanks, Edna. I think it was be helpful. What you actually brought here is the word humanize. Think we say workers, we suddenly see that's an entity. Men, women, it's important to humanize. I think that's the word. Second is looking at a holistic approach. I mean, and that's one of the things, like, I think organizations, advisory consultants, they always look at maybe, part of the problem. They pick out one part of the whole thing, and then, they give. And then there is no lack of intent here. The intent is here. End of the day, it's important that, how do we look at the whole thing so holistically? So very, very well call out another. And the issue also you brought out about the issue faced by the migrant workers. I think that's, and specifically from an India perspective, we have international migrant workers, but we have interstate migrant workers. Because India as a whole, there's so many countries within it, right? So how do we ensure and also be more holistic in that approach? And with that, I come to Rohini ji. So as an industry expert, could you give us an overview of the industry's current state regarding gender inclusivity from your own eyes as a woman?
Thank you, Ranjit. And thank you, everyone, for being here to listen to us and be part of this wonderful session. I have been visiting the hallowed halls of FICCI since the 1980s. And I'm pleased to see today there is almost a 35-40% representation of women in this very hall, where I would barely see one woman in the 80s. And it was always divided between FICCI and FLO, which was quite different in its footprint in the industry. But looking forward, I've heard everybody over here, and every point has been covered so well that it is heartening to me to know that the new generation as well as the old generation is moving forward in a wonderful way, where gender inclusivity is being talked about and actually being done. Because for me, gender equality has always been, I never thought of the word equality, all right? I just did what I had to do, because I feel this is what it is. If you want to do it as a woman, you will do it. However, we come of benefited societies and levels of families. But at the lower end, we have to work at gender inclusivity and equality. And for that, Rohit has clearly stated the demographic change that is happening in India, which I have seen since 1980, of mostly women workers in the south and men workers in the north. Now the demographics are changing because of Manrega and many other interstate regulations that are going on in the industry and affecting the labor force in that industry. Because I think today we are mostly talking about the labor force in the industry and how are we to empower them and make them an equity to our business. For that, I would like to say that in the last few years, in the last 25 years, since organizations like ATDC, organizations like NIFT have been formed, where both men and women are becoming for skill development, education in the industry. They have now changed the industry in such a large manner that more and more women are bringing in their courage and being courageous enough to get into industry. Also, since 1990, once the economy of India changed, there has been a large spurt of growth of women workers as well as women management workers. The opportunities are bigger in India and getting bigger minute by minute. I won't even say day by day today. We are moving really fast because the chariot that Sridhar mentioned, the chariot is like driven by 2 horses now and maybe 6 in the next minute. But yes, women are participating in the industry in a very, very large way. And isn't that true, Rajiv? And isn't that true, ladies? I mean, you have been so kind to share your experiences in your countries. And as I was walking up the lift, and I met Chandrima in the lift, and I said that we were talking that it's a talk about gender equity. So she says that's pretty unfair to men. So I would actually like to say that I won't say it is unfair or fair. We are not here to discuss. However, the training processes that happen in all the skill developments in the colleges has to be equal for men as well as women, because the opportunity is available in our country equally, and the implementation of that has to be equally in the industry. So I feel that, and this in the lower levels which we are working with the labor classes, what is very interesting to me was the point that Vijay Mathur said is in-house training in the factories. Earlier, we used to call that pilot trainings, and what Paranjeet said that we started encouraging women to work at the factories. So I feel that on the shop floor level is one of the key things. While you're training the women, the men also have to be socially sensitized towards not women workers as their workers, but towards women as general.
Yeah.
So without that happening, the gender equity is not going to take place.
True. I think it's very important to actually engage with men.
Absolutely.
And so in the interest of time,
Absolutely.
let's go into the second round. I have an announcement.
In lacking the time. So we think we can skip the Q&A and we can continue the Q&A session in our high tea.
Okay.
Right?
Sure.
And
So I think let's continue with the second round 2. Okay. I think very, very insightful thoughts out. So coming back to Halima, a straightforward question, Halima, for you. And in fact, that how can businesses effectively navigate the intersection of ethical trade and gender inclusive skill development? And from your perspective as a gender expert, what trends or patterns have you observed regarding gender inclusivity in the retail and manufacturing sectors? Now, of course, it's a global perspective, but since you have insight into the supply chains, so it would be good to and you have 3 minutes. So maybe very, very focused responses. Thank you.
So I think you mentioned it in your earlier statement, Rajiv, that the trend tends to be to focus on training and sort of training in the purest form of training, whereas we've already heard it from various speakers that we have to take a much more holistic approach to gender inclusivity. Yes, we need skill enhancement, but it has to be much broader than that. And as I was preparing for this session, I remembered a case of one of our member companies telling me about some work that they've been doing in India trying to get women into supervisory roles, and they'd been doing all the trainings, upskilling women, etc., but they just were not seeing the numbers progress as they would have liked to. And so following a focus group discussion exercise with the women workers, it came down to a simple question of overtime pay. So as a supervisor, the overtime pay that they would get is not there. Whereas if they're on the shop floor, they're working as operators, they have that flexibility to work overtime hours and be able to supplement their income. So for them, it just didn't make financial sense to really want to be a supervisor when they would prefer to just remain on the shop floor and, get the extra pay from overtime, which, it's really simple, but it just shows how we need to think much more broadly when we're trying to, enhance skills of women in the hope that we create more gender equal workplaces. I think one trend that I would like to flag and I would like to, bring to the discussion is the fact that we're in a world where climate change is at the focus of everyone. We talked about the E in the first panel, and now we're talking about the S. But actually, we need to be talking about the two of them at the same time. A couple of months ago, I learned of a factory in Bangladesh that's trying to bring in 3D precision cutting machinery to try and minimize fabric waste. And we know the general perception is that women are not skilled enough to be able to use modern technology, quote unquote. So I asked the question, I said, is this factory giving women the opportunity to be able to be trained to use this machinery? And I'm glad to say they were, but that may not be the case in other factories. So I think as we are moving towards an environment where climate is at the heart of what we're doing, we're looking at more sustainable production methods. Probably we're looking at technological advances that come with this. We have to make sure that we carry women along on this technological advancements and that they are given the same opportunities to be able to, transition into these, more environmentally sustainable production practices. I think the other thing that I'd like to highlight as a trend is that obviously we know that mandatory the due diligence legislation is there, and it's going to put us all, on the edges of our seats to be better, to do better. I think companies need to invest in systems that will enable them to do that due diligence with a better gender lens, and they need to support their supplier base to do the same. So perhaps we need to stop thinking in terms of a siloed nature of, just workers, but actually trying to do more in terms of upskilling factories and the management within factories to make sure that this is integrated as part and parcel of what they do. So when you've got factories who understand why they need to invest in women, who are willing to make those investments and who are creating the enabling environment to support that, then what we do would be much more sustainable in the longer term. So I think that conversation around management systems and getting factories to be thinking a little bit differently about gender inclusivity is really, really critical. And it's going to start to, show as due diligence legislation, starts to make us basically do better and to try and, understand the risks. So I think for me, those are the two things that I want to highlight, that we need to be looking at the E and the S at the same time from a gender lens, and we need to be looking at how we invest more in factory management and their systems as well.
Thanks, Halima. I think very interesting and very, very rightly called on the importance of European due diligence, which are coming up very soon. And I think most of us who are supplying to European countries, it's important that, we create those mechanisms. And second, of course, is, the ENS to be brought together. I think it's the whole thought process here. And I think when we talk about career progression, I think it could be, peer-to-peer also, which means, maybe training women. You don't see women in embroidery sections, for example. Some of them they have started, but, generally, all high technical jobs in a factory situation, you don't see women. It's a men thing. So the normalization is very, very important. Okay, coming quickly to Francesca. So can you share specific initiative or program that has had a notable impact on both gender inclusivity and business sustainability from a Sainsbury perspective? 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just so inspired by my fellow kind of colleagues on the panel, and I've just been trying to take it all in. So I was thinking of bringing the the tea industry kind of in Kenya case study and how we were involved in that. But actually, I think a role as a retailer and the kind of size of retailer we are, we source from 70 different countries. It can make it seem like the bigger challenges always happen over there. So I think there's this perspective, especially because we are very strongly UK based in terms of our core operations, that most of the Asian supply chain happen in South Asia or Latin America. But actually, I want to bring you a case study from the UK because there is so much work to be done in every single one of the locations where we operate in. And the struggles that women face, they might not be exactly the same, but there's a lot of similar trends around barriers to senior positions, lack of that kind of training, lack of opportunities. And so the program that I lead in at Sainsbury's, and I want to bring you a recent example, is within the logistics side, which has been a blind spot for a lot of businesses. Businesses spend so much on due diligence at factory, supply level, plantation level, farm, on health, safety, ethical issues, and then it would enter our logistics operations within Sainsbury's, and it would be a black box. We knew nothing what was happening, yet we knew there's a lot of migrant workforce, female workers, who are vulnerable, who are experiencing exploitation, and we had zero visibility of this. And so, through the case that I want to bring you is how we've tried to empower women within our logistics, especially temporary labor or agency labor colleagues within our logistics that support our logistics operations. As you might know, following Brexit and then the COVID pandemic, there's been some huge changes and challenges within logistics in the UK. The new immigration landscape has made it harder also to recruit for blue-collar jobs as well. And so because of this lack of these labor shortages and the criticality of a lot of these operations vital to deliver product, get to people's homes, transport between supplier and different distribution, parts of our distribution network. Women started to there's been a rise in women professionals within logistics, supply chain logistics, which is quite an interesting phenomenon. But we realized that women were often stuck in more clerical roles or office-based roles. And so what we tried to do was trying to change the way we conduct recruitment to adapt the discourse in recruitment jobs in the ads, also encouraging our partners to put up videos demonstrating the working conditions, offering to make arrangements to make work more suitable for women. For example, something very common in our Sainsbury's warehouses, you have to work in chilled, where the temperatures are very low. And so, for example, some women would complain about how cold it was in the warehouse. We tried to provide better uniforms so that people could feel more protected from the cold. But then also women wouldn't get to those management positions. And so we tried to think, okay, how can we map women's journeys as soon as they start working in our warehouses or within our logistics operations, or women drivers, female drivers, and unlock those opportunities for them. And we found, for example, sometimes it was lack of decent washroom facilities for women, for example, or changing rooms that needed renovation or need more cleanliness, for example. Or it was also sometimes around that kind of pay parity. Sometimes it wasn't there either. So what we've done is through initial kind of risk and needs assessment, we identify a lot of these pain points. How could we unlock the experience of female workers? And what we can see now is, I would say, some of the top performers we have in the network that bring people together, that help us with attrition and retention of staff, promote a positive work culture, are this powerhouse females and women within our network, the logistics network, which I work with every day. And so I think adopting this more kind of gender lens towards hiring, recruitment, training, upskilling, I think has really helped us shift from what was a very male-dominated industry, also because maybe we were not making space for women or opportunities to women to progress in the industry, to say women actually can do these jobs and actually they can excel at them. And so I think from us, it's been really about, when we talk about diversity inclusion, and I'm already probably a bit over time on the 3 minutes, it's not just being wishy-washy about it as a retailer. Yes, we promote gender equalities. What are you actually doing about it? And to me, is about looking at when I go on site now, and the people I see within the table are women who are managers, who are leading teams, who are leading thousands of workers and this really complex operations, whereas 10, 15 years ago, they weren't there. I wouldn't be there either. That's the other points. So this is just an example. There's many others, but I think, especially within the UK, I think it's also about breaking the myth about that not everything is where we need to be, even in countries that are considered to have more policies or more regulated environments. It's just about understanding that there's work to do everywhere, and we have a huge responsibility. And you touch on accountability. We are ultimately accountable for people not feeling empowered in our value chain, people not having the resources and means to achieve, fulfill their career ambitions and their potential. And then the responsiveness, how do we react knowing that these issues occur? And moving away from just paper promises and empty speeches and policies to actually what do we do on the ground? And that's what my role is really helping to provide those tools.
True. I think that's a very, very interesting, insight, Francesca, you gave. Thank you so much. Specifically, I think, generally all these discussions, they are hovered around where the supply chains are. But I think the issues are everywhere. And then you gave a very interesting example that, even the places where you have more regulated environments like United Kingdom, I think you have been able to appreciate perhaps because, maybe you had seen the other side. So it's very, very interesting that you bring this to the table. And congratulations that, the change has occurred so nicely. Thank you. Now, back to Edna. Edna, direct question. What, according to you, you are a practitioner, right? So, you go to factories day in, day out, and you are passionate about doing the right thing. So what, according to you, is the biggest impediment for the supply chain to adopt gender-friendly initiative? I think Rohit touched about it. I think it has evolved. North India, South India, Rohini talked about things are changing, but you are there on the ground. So what do you think is the biggest impediment? Maybe not only from a supply chain perspective, but you see in a day-to-day life. But 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjib. And so, as I said, Ranjib, the biggest issue that that I have understood is that there is a lack of responsible recruitment practices that needs to be implemented and followed. There is employment of both types, formal as well as informal. And especially when we talk about migrant workers. So I have been saying this, from the beginning of this panel discussion, that it's not just female workers who are very vulnerable, it's the migrant workers also. And, as you rightly said, so we've interstate migrant workers in India, and there's a lot of agents, recruitment agents involved who are literally controlling these workers, making them move from one factory to another factory every 6 months in order to make money, because they get that money from the employers, but the workers are missing on their benefits. The second thing, what I definitely understand is there is an element of human trafficking. And, as part of the work that I have been involved in southern India, there is a lot of human trafficking that happens. And, with the help of our implementation partner, the NGO, the local NGO there, we have been able to rescue a lot of female workers. So imagine, while we are talking about, safe workplaces, there are also factories here, and some of these groups are like big groups, well-known factories and exporters. And I would say that, who are still like, not paying the workers, holding their wages, when there is time for, for them to go back to their villages for Diwali and for other festivals like Chhat Puja. They're also keeping their original documents. They're not allowing them, to use mobile phones. And there is that sense of, I would say that, there's so much of control over the workers that, even the switches of the rooms that we're staying, especially when I talk about hostel accommodations, are outside. So it's the warden who controls what time the light has to go on, what time the light has to go off. So these kind of issues. And then, there's a lot of discrimination that happens. When we do these trainings in the community as part of our community engagement programs, we often see that, sometimes we have to gather workers, and, it doesn't happen like every worker can come to the same place and, we could provide trainings. And the reason because is they cannot cross, the road from one side to go to the other side, because this is like people of the higher caste living there, and then there are people from the lower class, the Dalits living there, and they cannot mix together. So when I'm talking about all these things, these are the impediments. How are you going to bring that change in, And it is so culturally deep rooted. And apart from that, I always understand that, yes, as brands, we are definitely responsible, but it is not just the brands who are responsible for bringing this change, and brands alone will never be able to bring 100% change within the supply chain. We alone will not be able to move the needle. And we've seen that. All of us have seen that. You have seen that. We have seen that. It has to be a collaborative approach. And when I say that, it has to be stakeholder engagement where the industry associations start taking responsibility of what's happening in the supply chains in the cities and coming out of that denial mode, painting a very nice picture of the sourcing region, saying everything is good when we all know that what the workers go through. And again, I would say that it is so important that, female workers are financially independent, not just earning, but learning how to utilize manage their expenses, manage their salaries. And men also have to be engaged in these kind of conversations and initiatives, because we are talking about empowering women, but then if they're not getting that respect, if they're not getting that level of exposure and opportunities, you said that, women are often not seen working on a computer, embroidery machines. I'm very surprised to say that a woman who can carry a child for 9 months is considered not strongly physically or mentally fit to work on certain operations. I mean, how on what parameters are we, developing these criterias, to define women, empowering women? And then the second thing, which I know is a buzzword here, and I really, as much as I really hate to say this, but what we've been talking about is worker voice, grievance mechanism. Every other brand, every other organization is talking about, providing a platform to the workers. Why are these platforms not effective? Why the implementation of these platforms is not really working in an effective manner is because there is a lack of trust amongst the workers. They know that whatever said and done, there is no proper remediation that happens. Every other organization or brand wants to come in with their own thing. So a collaborative approach where the workers feel actually empowered. I, as a woman working in an organization, what empowers me is the fact that I have a voice. Tomorrow, if I face an issue, I have the right, I have that space to go and talk about it. And I know that, there's something going to happen about it without I being judged as a woman, and I am going to get access to remedy. That's what's lacking, and I think we all need to come together. It's high time. It has to be the factories, because factories alone can't be blamed. It's not easy to run a factory with hundreds and thousands of workers dealing with those day-to-day issues. It has to be the industry associations, the brands, the unions, the NGOs, because we're all fighting for the same cause. But our approaches are so different. So why not come under the same umbrella? And, high time to do something about it. So these are the impediments. And I think I also talked to you about the solutions also. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ranjit.
And this was very, very insightful. I think what I heard was collaboration. I think we have been talking about collaboration a long, long time. Hopefully we have ethical trading initiative here who would actually maybe play the role of somebody, but somebody has to hold it all together. That's one. Second is a holistic approach. Third is, and that's why in ICC change, we are decided, I think earlier it was very easy that you want to do something, partner with a brand, and then the brand, and then that's the other unfortunate part, that every single brand wants to bring their own version of sustainability as to what they think is the right way, without taking into account what is actually is needed. And the solution of the problem is where the problems are. I think that should be the mindset when we actually approach. Yes. So with that, I want to maybe pose this question to Rohit. I think very, very clear cut, without anecdotes. If he can tell us that, how do you collaborate with, your retail partners, brands from a manufacturer perspective? to ensure that gender inclusive skill enhancement throughout the supply chain? Thank you.
Sorry. Working with most of the top brands across the sportswear universe and other brands as well. What I want to highlight here is the code of conduct, which is formed by most of the brands. Is it also taking into account the stakeholders, which we as a labor, the country which produces the goods, is it taking that into account? Are we into consultation with the context of the Indian society as well? I just want to highlight like we are developing skilling centers or training centers across India, across factories, across places like in factory training, which you talked about. And when we're talking about training female workers into supervisory roles and into other roles, before that, adding to the basic labor force of the country, adding female workers into the labor force of the country, sometimes we forget the context of the society at large. Some time back, we did a study in terms of setting up some training centers in rural areas for getting the workers, feeding our workers from trained rural workers into our factories. And we set up a training center, and the initial part of it was a primary education, because that is what was lacking in the first place for the worker as well. We thought the primary education is the first requirement of a female girl child. A school kind of a setup was started. And we realized that when we went the whole setup, there were 200, 300 people, 300 girls who came and enrolled in the school. That within the next week, there was nobody there, nobody left to teach or to.
So the dropout rate was.
The dropout was zero. Then there was nobody left. Now, what was the problem? We went back to the villages, cluster of villages where the feeding workers. The girl child was supposed to help in the household duties and other things, and they said, who will gonna do this? So there is no point in teaching her. Then the whole paradigm changed, where we need to develop. We thought that we need to give them some skills of embroidery, of training, of sewing, and combined with the primary education. We can't just do that as school in isolation. But when you do that together and you give them some remuneration for doing the embroidery part of it, which will compensate for them not doing their household and work in the khet or something which they will do normally. Until then, there's nothing like work. But if you do this, then you are in the crosshairs of a code of conduct of most of the brands. We are underage employment. As a factory or as a brand, you can't do that. So I feel that I'm not saying that underage employment should be allowed, but there has to be some consultation and some mutual way to find in most of the things which are there in the code of conduct, which are maybe made in Manhattan places or in London or wherever the fairware and other things are formed. It needs to be done in the consultation with the actual society in which it has to be implemented.
So, in fact, you underscored the whole fact that that again bringing in the whole perspective of finding local solutions. Again, I think there are concepts like child rights versus child labor. So obviously,
so I'm not saying that you employ child laborers, but then at the end of the day, there's a middle way. There's a middle path.
So the line is about collaboration. What Edna touched about. Everybody is talking about collaboration, and I think what we feel is that the entry point should be we have to work together with the industry. Industry has to take ownership. It should not be that it's that somebody is telling that you have to do it. Earlier we were audit mindset. Now we have project mindset. You have audit fatigue. Then you have project fatigue. Time has come to actually look at something which is more solution centric, and that's where I think organizations like ETI and ICC and others and ADDC can actually play a role. And most of it, I think, manufacturers also. Rohini, one word from your side, from the whole perspective. What is your?
My take is I'm very attached to the manufacturing side of this business, although I've been in the sourcing. And one of the things that I really did appreciate here was what Paranjit said, is the manufacturers in India have to set their own goals. It's not about the brands. It's not about the retailers outside India who will be setting goals for us. Also, what Rohit said in terms of training the children in skilling them for the future, that has to be done in India. We are, at a stage in our industrialization where if we do not skill the children right from the beginning, we are not going to be having the correct labor force who is not only committed, is also responsible. It's not only our responsibility towards them, it's their responsibility towards their own work and the country and the business that they do. So I feel that the thought process from the West needs to change to make it more ground reality. And I can give you a very good example of this, which is happening in Tirupur at one of the factories there. The labor that they used to get, migratory labor, they have actually adopted a village. And instead of putting them in hostels, they have put the labor into the villages and given them homes there with a school, a temple, and all the cultural requirements that are required to be there, so that the children can grow up well. They have closeness to the factories, and the area also gets developed. Now, these small measures, and as well as the children development in skilling, has to take place from right age 0. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
So in fact, skilling, when you say, it's not only skilling in skills, but also maybe skilling in other things also.
Yes.
Because as we say, we are in a gender unequal society. It's always there.
Yes.
So how do we actually address the issue of normalized behavior? The awareness part, that's the first part. And then institutions where we have manufacturers and also brands to some extent, they have to be accountable in terms of their policies, their procedures. And last but not the least, the top people should be responsible. So with this, I think I thank you, all of you, to you who have taken out time and come up with your beautiful thoughts, and we'll come back to you. And I think this journey should continue. And thank you, Rohit. Thank you, Rohini ji, with your insights. Halima, Edna, Francesca. Thank you so much. And of course, we have Vishal, who is an individual, invisible force here, who is actually very, very an important cog in this whole seminar. Thank you so much. And last, I thank everybody for your time. Over to MC.
Thank you, Ranjeev. And thanks to all the panelists for such an inspiring thoughts. This topic is definitely close to my heart as well. Now to deliver the vote of thanks, I invite Mr. Vijay Mathur, Director General, ATDC, to summary of key takeaways from panel discussions, acknowledgement of participants, and sponsor, expressing gratitude for the event success. Welcome.
So first of all, I should thank Roshni ji for giving me this opportunity. Roshni ji, I should thank you, and because you have been okay. So my heartfelt thanks go to Dr. A. Shaktivel, Padma Shri, Bhishma Patama of textile industry, who is the chairman of Apparel, Made-up and Home Furnishing Sector Skill Council, who has been a force behind today's program. So a big thanks to him. He has flown to Australia, I think this morning, and he was supposed to be here. I thank Mr. Asi Kesar. I know him personally, and his 50 years of experience has really helped. I would also like to thank Madam Uma Sethji from PT for being here in the introductory session. And then I would like to thank Mr. Sridhar, who was the moderator of the first panel discussion, consisting of Madam Chandrima, Mr. Rana Alok Singh ji, Mr. Singh from Pre-Empro, Mr. Amit Gupta. And thanks to Ranjeev ji for wonderful session moderating, and also Mr. Vishal, invisible person, as Ranjeev said. And my heartfelt thanks to Madam Francesca from Sainsbury. And I'm very happy to note that she is supporting women in logistics, office roles, mapping women's journey wonderful new things which have come up. Thanks to Madam Halima Ahmed from V, and she said she would like to carry women along, and hopefully she would see supervisory positions to women in India when she is next. I thank Mr. Rohit Aneja for his beautifully coming out on the code of conduct. So that's a new point. And then thanks to Madam Edna Titus, she was quite worried about the employment to the people, the role of the contractors, which are the impediments. So I think the House will take care of that. Thanks to Madam Rohini ji for coming out with her version. I would like to thank Mr. Chetan and Naseem for looking fantastically for audio visual. There was no interruption. Wonderful, wonderful.